Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin. A great guest, Sidney Powell. How are you, my friend?
Great, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
My honor. Former federal prosecutor. You were, in fact, this is quite remarkable, you worked at the Department of Justice for 10 years. You worked in 3 federal districts under 9 different United States attorneys. It's not that you changed, it's that they changed over the course of time when a new administration comes in or what have you. And these U.S. attorneys were appointed by presidents of both parties, right?
Exactly.
And you also have been lead counsel in more than 500 federal appeals, 350 of them as an assistant United States attorney and appellate section chief in the western and northern districts of Texas. I just want our audience to know how significant that is, how impressive that is, because there's a lot of brilliant assistant United States attorneys out there. And you were one of them.
Thank you.
And I want to take a very, very close look at Robert Mueller's office. A lot of people focus on Robert Mueller, and they should. But this Svengalian there, my word, is the number 2 guy who Mueller relies on for everything, Andrew Weissmann. So let's focus a little bit on Andrew Weissmann so the American people know who he is and knows who really is the, in many cases, the Wizard of Oz. Tell us about Andrew Weissmann.
Well, I have called Mr. Weissmann the poster boy for prosecutorial misconduct because Mueller had a role in handpicking him for head of the Enron task force and appointing him to that position.
And what was Mueller at the time?
Mueller was in the FBI at the time.
He was the director of the FBI.
Yes.
So he picks Weissmann to handle the Enron case.
Yes. Weissmann was deputy director at the time when they first started under Leslie Caldwell, who was the chief of the Enron task force when it was first created in the collapse of Enron. So they set about and targeted Arthur Andersen to begin with, the venerable accounting firm.
So they're investigating Enron.
Yes.
And they target Arthur Andersen.
Yes.
For what?
For destroying evidence, is what they called it. But they did it by making up a crime, by combining 2 separate statutes to create a crime out of something that wasn't. So they destroyed Arthur Andersen. They knew they were going to destroy the company. They sealed.
Now, how did they destroy Arthur Andersen?
By indicting it.
They indict Arthur Andersen because they're the financial advisors to Enron.
Exactly. They were the auditors and financial advisors to Enron.
And they manufacture a crime by combining 2 different statutes.
Exactly.
And at that time, how many people worked for Arthur Andersen?
85,000 people worked for Arthur Andersen.
85,000 people. And Weissmann was the lead investigator.
He was the lead prosecutor on that case.
And he reported, in part, he informed the director of the FBI at the time, Mueller.
Yes.
Okay. Well, what did they do?
Well, they knew they were going to destroy the company when they indicted it because Andersen represented 2,500 publicly traded companies. And no auditor who represents publicly traded companies can function as an auditor when they're indicted. So they sealed the indictment for a week while they...
They indict them. Seal the indictment for a week.
Yes.
That's absolute disaster for accountants, auditors, financial advisors.
Yes.
Okay.
And they worked behind the scenes during that week to avoid upheaval in the markets so that when they announce the indictment and unseal it publicly, the markets are not as disruptive as they would have been if they had just indicted them publicly immediately.
What did they indict Arthur Andersen for?
They indicted them under a witness tampering statute. And the way they did it, they essentially took criminal intent out of the process. And in fact, when the Supreme Court later got the case, Justice Rehnquist wrote the decision for the majority, well, for the unanimous Supreme Court, and said it was shocking how little criminal culpability the jury instructions had required, and that Andersen had not committed a crime at the time.
So Andersen gets caught up in this Enron case. Weissmann must know that there wasn't mens rea, or criminal culpability. He indicts the entity, which for a major international corporation is a disaster to begin with, because then you get documents subpoenaed and so forth. You have to be searching your computers and your records here and all over the world and so forth. So it creates great tumult in a company.
Completely.
And that in and of itself, depending on the nature of the subpoenas and the indictment and so forth, can freeze a company. And so here's this company, Arthur Andersen, that's in the business of protecting other companies. They're auditors, they're accountants, they're financial advisors. And they're being accused of what? Witness tampering?
Yes, and obstruction of justice under 2 different statutes that combined created this new offense because there wasn't one. Andersen had not been subpoenaed for any documents at the time. Andersen was cleaning up his files and proceeding to get ready for the investigation. So they just made up a new offense by combining the 2 different statutes.
Now, do you call the name of the federal trial judge that was involved in the case?
Melinda Harmon in Houston.
Melinda Harmon in Houston. And then I assume they appealed it?
Andersen did appeal it.
And what happened on appeal?
The Fifth Circuit affirmed it on appeal.
Affirmed it. Then they appeal it to the United States Supreme Court, which takes the case, which is relatively rare.
Yes.
And the justices look at this. You mentioned Rehnquist, and they say, wait a minute. There's no criminal intent. There's no criminal culpability. This isn't even really a statute. The instructions were faulty. And what did the Supreme Court rule?
They reversed it unanimously.
Unanimously. Every justice said no.
Exactly.
What happened to Mr. Weissman since he led the case?
Oh, absolutely nothing. Mr. Weissman went on to become director of the Enron Task Force. Mm-hmm. In fact, he had already, by the time Andersen was reversed, he had already turned his sights on the Merrill Lynch defendants in what was called the Enron or Nigerian barge case, and indicted 4 Merrill Lynch executives on a multi-count indictment in which they also made up a crime.
I want to get to that in a minute. What happened to Andersen?
Andersen was destroyed the minute it was indicted.
It collapsed.
It collapsed. Not only was it under criminal indictment, so it lost all its clients, but I think 160 civil plaintiffs piled on in multiple lawsuits.
So it was crushed. All those people lost their jobs.
Exactly.
Investors lost all their money.
All the partners lost their money.
They lost everything on a case that was reversed 9-0 by the United States Supreme Court that Mr. Weissman was in charge of.
Yes, and Andersen had been known to be the hallmark, the benchmark for accounting standards. Andersen was the gold standard for accounting, a venerable accounting firm.
Merrill Lynch, you mentioned. Was Weissman involved in that?
Oh, yes.
What happened to Merrill Lynch?
Merrill Lynch was indicted, well, not the company, but I think one of the reasons they indicted Andersen was to send a message to other companies that if they knocked on your door, if the Enron Task Force knocked on your door, you'd better cooperate or you could be destroyed and given the death penalty just like Andersen was.
But even if you don't know anything, you didn't do anything.
Exactly.
That's the power.
That is the power.
That a handful of prosecutors have.
Yes.
And you even see it today with the indictments. Mueller hands down indictments. It's all one-sided. People need to understand the other side doesn't have any say in it. They haven't had a chance to respond to it. Nothing's happened, but a group of government lawyers have decided to charge somebody or some entity with crimes. That's the beginning of the process. It's not the end of the process, and I want to pursue this with you a little bit more later because the media treat it as, well, that's it. But I want to talk about these executives with Merrill Lynch. What happened to them?
Well, essentially, Merrill Lynch offered them up as sacrificial lambs and entered into a non-prosecution agreement with the government on behalf of Merrill Lynch, the company, that was extremely onerous. In fact, they agreed to have an overseer from the Enron Task Force installed in Merrill Lynch for a period of 18 months to oversee everything, including the bills that the defense lawyers were submitting. They agreed that no Merrill Lynch employee could say anything that contradicted the government's view of the prosecution, which was absolutely astounding and I think illegal. And then the Merrill Lynch executives...
So the government secretes itself within the company it's investigating.
Yes.
To oversee the bills that they're paying their defense counsel.
Yes. And everything else that's going on in the company.
Sounds thoroughly unconstitutional. These 4 executives, they're indicted. What happens to them?
Their lives are destroyed. They went through a 10-year period of unmitigated hell. There was the investigation, and then they're indicted, and then they face trial. The trial was a circus. I detail it at length in my book.
This book?
Yes.
License to Lie.
Yes. They were tried in Houston in the wake of the
Enron.
In the wake of the Enron collapse.
People were angry.
People were furious. Anderson had just been convicted, so there was all the uproar about that. All of Houston was in turmoil because of the collapse.
So what
of
happened
Enron.
to these four?
They were all convicted. The lawyers for the defense were like deer in headlights most of the time. They were blindsided at every turn.
By the government.
By the government. They had made repeated requests for what's called Brady material. Because the government holds all the cards in a
Brady
criminal
material.
prosecution,
Yeah.
the government is legally, constitutionally, and ethically required to produce any evidence that is favorable to the defense, that is within the government's possession or within its reach. Oh no, they steadfastly denied that there was any such Brady material. When the defense kept making demand after demand after demand, the judge at the time, Judge Ewing Werlein, who was assigned the Merrill Lynch case, finally made the government produce a list of people that they had admitted might have some Brady material. And then upon further demand, he finally ordered the government to produce summaries of that material.
When we come back, I want to know ultimately what happened to these four executives. Then I want to continue to examine Mr. Weissman, because it's very, very crucial, and beyond that, how this special counsel's office is operating. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, most weeknights you can watch me on Levin TV, Levin TV. Go to blazetv.com/Mark. I hope you'll sign up there, blazetv.com/Mark. Or give us a call at 844-LEVIN-TV, 844-LEVIN-TV. We would love to have you at our conservative town hall over there. We'll be right back. Sidney Powell. So 4 executives at Merrill Lynch are prosecuted by Weissman and his team after he had finished with pretty much Anderson. That company is collapsing. And he's going after Merrill Lynch. They have secreted themselves into the operations of Merrill Lynch. They even look at everything from what the defense counsel's charging, which is really quite exceptional. And 4 men are charged, executives. They're convicted?
Yes. They were indicted for conspiring to defraud Enron of the honest services of Andrew Fastow.
Okay. What happened? I assume they appealed?
They were all convicted. They did appeal. And on appeal, the Fifth Circuit reversed 12 out of the 14 counts of conviction. They reversed all the honest services counts against all the Merrill Lynch defendants and the related wire fraud counts.
So let's be clear in plain English. So all the counts relating to their work with Enron and so forth were reversed?
Yes. All the honest
All of
services fraud charges were reversed. The conspiracy and the wire fraud charges, yes. Because they were not valid charges, the defendant's conduct was not criminal. But the real atrocity was that these men, at the urging of Mr. Weissman and his Enron task force cohorts, were sent to prison upon their conviction.
So they didn't wait for the appeal. They immediately sent them off to federal prison. What kind of federal prison?
The youngest Merrill Lynch defendant was sent to a maximum security federal transfer facility with the worst of the worst criminals in the country.
You know, when I was chief of staff to the attorney general, I saw some of these facilities. I saw Marion, which is a final top security prison. Why would they send this gentleman to a maximum security prison where we have terrorists, mass murderers, mobsters, gang bosses, the worst of the worst, in order to break them?
Yes. They did the worst things they could possibly do to these men in the system.
And that's Weissman. Weissman had to ask the Federal Bureau of Prisons to put that man in that place. Because if he didn't ask him, he wouldn't be in that place.
And that young man was completely acquitted on appeal.
He was completely acquitted on appeal. How long did he serve in this prison?
8 months away from his 2 young children and family in absolute unmitigated hell.
So you say 12 of the 14 were reversed. What were the other 2 counts?
The other 2 counts were absolutely appalling. My client was convicted and still stands convicted on 2 counts of perjury and obstruction of justice for testifying about his personal understanding of a telephone call he was not even on after Mr. Weissman in the grand jury told him to share his personal understanding of that phone call, whether it was accurate or not.
Well, this is interesting. Isn't that sort of the way they want to catch the President of the United States?
Exactly.
And yet, how many years ago was this?
This was 16, 18 years ago.
And this connection between Mueller and Weissman, 2 decades.
At least 2 decades.
Does he treat him almost like a child, like a son? He seems to bring Weissman with him wherever he goes, including as director of the FBI.
He did. He has been promoting and protecting Mr. Weissman for at least 2 decades.
And he's appointed special counsel, and his immediate first choice is Andrew Weissman to be his top lieutenant.
That's right.
I want to get into the treatment of the president by Mueller, Weissman, and team, but first I want to talk about Manafort. Last time I heard he was in solitary confinement in a federal prison.
Yes, he is.
Same treatment as the Merrill Lynch gentleman. Now, he was convicted by a jury in Virginia on multiple counts. Now they're back in D.C. trying to get more counts piled on. There have been reports that Manafort's depressed, that he's pretty broken. This is par for the course, isn't it? You know, you have a prosecution, you have conviction, and you move on to your next case. You were involved in a lot of cases.
Yes.
An assistant U.S. attorney for 9 different U.S. attorneys. This is different, though. This is really like a blood sport for Mr. Weissman, isn't it?
Oh, it definitely is, yes.
And so they're dragging him back into Washington, D.C. in front of an Obama judge, Mr. Chief Justice, and yes, it does make a difference. In front of an Obama judge who's very receptive, apparently, to the special counsel's arguments, and has been repeatedly.
Oh, yeah. She's the one that remanded Mr. Manafort to custody immediately upon their request and is allowing them to pile on the additional charges.
And when you look at the case involving Anderson and Merrill Lynch, these 4 executives, and on Manafort, like I say, it's almost as if it's not that they have more to offer. It's that there's almost an obsession, an odd desire to destroy these people, not just punish them, but to break them into 1,000 pieces.
That's exactly what it is. And Mr. Weissman did the same thing to another person not ascribed and licensed to lie, and that was young Enron treasurer Ben Glisson, who wanted to just plead guilty to a crime that he admitted he committed in one of Fastow's schemes and then reported to prison to serve his time. Mr. Weissman wanted him to cooperate and testify against other people. Well, Glisson just wanted to do his time and be done with it. So what happened when this young man, 30-something years old, reported to prison? He found himself immediately put into solitary confinement, which is a cell barely large enough to stand up in with a slit for light. You're caged like an animal for 23 hours a day. And he was completely broken. They left him there for almost 2 weeks and then put him in the general prison population. Solitary will drive a sane man insane within 24 hours.
I want to talk about this, and I want to bring in the fact that this gentleman, Weissman, so-called gentleman, is really the invisible hand that is pushing the effort against the President of the United States, in my view. We'll be right back.
Live from America's News headquarters, I'm Rick Leventhal. Virginia Governor Ralph Northam gives his first interview just a week after a racist photo from his medical school yearbook was discovered. Speaking to the Washington Post, the Democrat said he wants to focus the remainder of his term on, quote, racial equity, signaling once again he will not step down. Meantime, 2 women have now accused Virginia's Lieutenant Governor, Justin Fairfax, of sexual assault. Fairfax has denied the claims. The state's Attorney General admitted on Wednesday that he wore blackface to a college party in 1980. Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren is entering the race for president. She made it official earlier today during a rally in her home state. Just before her announcement, a manager for President Trump's re-election campaign called her a fraud. I'm Rick Leventhal. Now back to Life, Liberty, and Levin.
Sidney Powell, President of the United States, I think he was set up from day one. Before he was President of the United States.
Oh, I agree.
Even as a candidate, they were focused on him. I think the evidence is abundantly clear, and I don't much care what the Mueller report has to say. There needs to be another report on what took place when President Trump was candidate Trump, when President Trump was President-elect Trump, and then shortly after he became President Trump. There is a stream of factual information that the media essentially reject. But facts are facts that demonstrate that the Obama administration, at the highest levels, at the FBI, we haven't even gotten into the intelligence agencies unmasking individuals like Lieutenant General Flynn. We had a rush to unmask individuals in the last year of the Obama administration like we've never seen before in American history. People have not been pursued in that regard. We had the Hillary Clinton campaign. Earlier this week, there was information that 5 or 6 surrogates of the Clinton campaign were pushing this dossier into the FBI, and among others, Baker, the general counsel, who's now out and under criminal investigation, got a copy. Others also received copies of it because it turns out the Clinton campaign and the DNC, through their straw men and all the rest, they funded this operation, they funded the opposition research, and they pushed it into the FBI, into a friendly senior level of the FBI run by the Obama administration and the Loretta Lynch Justice Department. Now, Mr. Weissman, it turns out, based on this earlier reporting by John Solomon this week, was among several who were told by Bruce Orr, for America, he served on the staff of the Deputy Attorney General, very senior position. I had the position once. The Deputy Attorney General was an Obama holdover at some point. She became the Attorney General, Sally Yates, extremely partisan and a friend of Andrew Weissman's, as a matter of fact. And Weissman, before he goes into the special counsel, is one of the individuals who Bruce Orr tells, according to his testimony to Congress in closed session, this dossier, look, my wife works for Fusion GPS, which, secured the dossier, and just be careful about it, because it is involved in opposition research, and there are political aspects to it. So they developed this application that they filed with the FISA court. They put a tiny little footnote in there, which nobody read, including the federal judge who sits there as a FISA court judge, rather than explaining what this dossier is, because they want to ultimately investigate the man who becomes President of the United States, Donald Trump. Not Carter Page, not Manafort, they want Trump. And they get their FISA warrant. And they get it extended 3 times. Not once are these judges told about this really poisonous fruit, this dossier and the facts surrounding it. So I have 2 questions for you in the lead up here. Mr. Weissman, how in the world can he be on the special counsel's staff, really the man behind the man, when he knew from day one about that dossier? And then number 2, where are these federal judges? You and I practice law in federal court from time to time. A federal judge learns that false or misleading information was presented to him or her, and on that basis they sign off on a warrant. I can tell you the federal judges I practice, one in particular, Royce Lamberth, he would have dragged my butt back into court, he would have had an evidentiary hearing, and he would have held me in contempt. Where are these judges? So first of all, how does Weissman get away with this? I guess because Mueller wants them to. And secondly, why are these federal judges, now that they know the truth, it's all out in the media, why are they sitting silently?
Well, Weissman has been doing this for at least 20 years, and Bob Mueller knows it. That's what he brought him on the task force to do, or the
So you
special
think Bob
counsel.
Mueller wants this guy?
He has to.
He picked him.
He handpicked him.
In fact, he's advanced his career over the years.
He has totally advanced his career over the years, and he's protected him. And I know that because Bill Hodes and I filed a grievance against Andrew Weissman while he was Deputy Director General Counsel of the FBI under Mr. Mueller.
What
And
happened there?
Well, ironically enough, the Department of Justice was defending him against the grievance. We filed it with the New York Bar. And unbeknownst to us, the New York Bar punted it to the Department of Justice Office of Professional Responsibility to decide it while the Department of Justice was defending Mr. Weissman on it. And all of a sudden we get a letter from OPR, of course, finding absolutely nothing wrong, even though Mr. Weissman and his team had yellow highlighted evidence that they knew before the trial was favorable to the Merrill Lynch defendants, completely favorable to them, the exact language we needed to defend them before the trial that exonerated them completely.
So he skates
and
on
they
the edge.
hid it.
He skates on the edge. And he just seems to get away with it.
Oh, it wasn't even on the edge. The Fifth Circuit, in our motion for new trial appeal, found that the prosecutors plainly suppressed evidence favorable to the defense. They just bailed out the government by holding it wasn't material.
See, if this Fifth Circuit court ruling, material or not, that shows really sketchy conduct. You have the Supreme Court reversal. You have this man who's told that the dossier really is tainted. He winds up in the special counsel's office. You have these judges who don't plan to do a damn thing about any of it on the FISA court. Now you have them teeing up the President of the United States, and they say, we want to interview the President of the United States. It's no big deal. We just want to know his opinion about why he fired James Comey. We just want to know his opinion about Lieutenant General Mike Flynn. When we come back, I want you to explain to us why that's a problem. We'll be right back.
All three statewide Democrats embroiled in such controversy is not good for the Commonwealth. Obviously, as the Republican Party, we want what's best for Virginia.
I'm Scott, and this is the Fox Report. It's the bottom of the hour. If you're just joining us, Virginia lawmakers struggling with an accelerating political crisis. Democratic Governor Ralph Northam fending off calls to resign over a controversy that started last week with the emergence of a racist med school yearbook photo, and the Lieutenant Governor, Justin Fairfax, now denying a second allegation of sexual assault. Fairfax says it didn't happen, but Democrats say it's time for him to step down, and at least one state lawmaker issued an ultimatum.
On Monday, I intend to introduce articles of impeachment on Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax. Article 4, Section 17 of the Constitution of Virginia says very clearly that impeachment shall be for a high crime or misdemeanor. There's no question that violent sexual assault clearly qualifies as a high crime.
Let's bring in John Bussey, Associate Editor for the Wall Street Journal and a Fox News contributor. John, thanks for being with us. A lot to unpack here.
It is.
But what we see right there is a Democrat. These are Democrats calling for a Democrat to step down.
Yes, very complex. On the one hand, you have the governor and the attorney general having had these images either in their yearbook or participating in blackface events,
right.
In blackface, racism, odious judgment. On the other, you have Fairfax. These are charges of sexual assault against him. Now, what this politician was saying was, we're going to impeach him based on the charges against him. These are two different types of cases. One of kind of racism and judgment. The other of was a crime committed.
Well, let's just finish up with Fairfax first, since we're talking about him now, and you see him on the screen there. You have a Democrat saying he needs to resign, and if he doesn't, they're going to try and impeach him. And this is a state house that's actually controlled by Republicans by a slim margin, right?
Yeah. So, yes. And there's no trial yet, right? So these are charges against him. He's saying it didn't happen. So the Democratic Party is going to be in conflict. Should they wait for an investigation to take place, a trial to take place, a conviction or innocence to be found? They're going to have to wait for that or make that judgment call, or are they going to sort of run for the exits here because they see their entire leadership in trouble? They're worried about coming elections. They're worried about that leadership not being able to do things like structure a win down ballot, fundraise for other candidates.
Initially, leading Democrats were reluctant to speak out against Fairfax when there was one accuser, and now there's two, and they're saying, get him out, and he's saying, I didn't do it.
Right. So the second accuser, it's more explicit, and it's a charge of her charge against him of rape.
Rape.
You're seeing Republicans say that the Democrats were too slow in stepping up and asking for him to step down. But again, this is a person, charges have been brought against him. There hasn't been a trial yet.
Yeah.
This is all going to play into 2020 because the Republicans are now looking at Virginia and saying that a state that had kind of moved blue, that had moved into the Democratic realm, went 5 points for Clinton in the 2016 election. They see an opportunity to perhaps bring that back now. And they're targeting what they view as vulnerable Democratic candidates.
We heard from Larry Sabato earlier today about this issue. I want to play you a quick soundbite. You can react to that.
All 19 Democrats in the 40-seat state Senate have now called on Fairfax to resign. So everybody's lawyered up. That's the way we do things. And there will be, I assume, some kind of investigation. But I think it's going to be difficult, very difficult for Fairfax to survive, though last week we didn't think that Governor Northam could possibly survive.
My sense is that we're going to learn more on Monday, that this thing could ramp up even more next week.
You may see them buckling under the pressure to step out of office while a trial takes place or while these events kind of reach some kind of conclusion, some kind of clarity. Northam is hoping to hang on. He said at first, well, yeah, it was me, but then he said, well, it really wasn't me.
That's an important point. Initially, this picture comes out of him, a picture on his yearbook page of someone in blackface with someone in a Klan robe, and his first reaction was, yeah, that's me, I'm sorry, and the next day he said, I changed my mind, it wasn't me.
Right.
Wouldn't you remember if that was you?
I think so. 1984 was when the yearbook was published.
We're talking about the governor now, the governor of Virginia.
That's right, and I think that's where he has run into particular problems. If he had come out at the beginning and said, look, here's my accurate memory of what happened, I apologize, but it was the back and forth, on this that has damaged his credibility. Mind you, that it was a few years later, 2013, these incidents kept happening in this yearbook. There seemed to have been sort of a culture within the community of this sort of thing happening. And finally, the president of the university said, no more yearbook.
In 2013, you're saying, as recently as then?
Yes.
So Northam is saying, like, he's now had a reawakening to racial issues and racial inequalities. He's promising change in inequities and access to education, health care, and more. He says we're ready to learn from our mistakes. So that's his take. That's his reaction to the emergence of any picture of this kind, that we're going to make changes now in Virginia.
Right.
And that's his way of trying to hang on to office?
Yeah. So the question is, how willing are Virginians to allow him redemption? Or is the black community a critical voting constituency in Virginia? Are Democratic women looking at this and saying we have problems in the top leadership? I don't feel that they can actually represent my interests, no matter how apologetic they may be.
If Northam can't stay on, Fairfax would be his normal replacement, but Fairfax may be forced to resign or be impeached. So then you have the Attorney General, right, who would then be the next governor, except that he also has a picture.
Yeah, has said himself that he dressed in blackface. He has kind of admitted this. It's a little bit different than the Northam story because he's come out and said, I did it, I apologize for it, there wasn't this back and forth. If he goes, guess what? The governorship falls to the Republican head of the House of Delegates in Virginia.
John, what do you think is going to happen? Just your prediction.
I have no idea. It depends upon the patience of Virginians, whether or not they're going to allow him to do what he's seeking to do, which is to allow other news events to kind of cascade along, and eventually this kind of moves into the distance. The National Democratic Party kind of feels that will happen, that there'll be so much focus on Trump going into 2020, Virginia will be a sideshow. But Virginia it's a dangerous way to view that, because Virginia can also be a critical state for the Democrats to control in 2020. He hopes to hang on. We'll have to see whether he's able to.
John Bussey from the Wall Street Journal, thanks very much.
Pleasure.
Well, the French government is condemning yellow vest protesters for setting a military vehicle